There is a photograph taken in the garden of a country house in Switzerland sometime in the 1960s. Charlie Chaplin, the most famous man of the 20th century, is sitting in a wicker chair in the sun. His wife Una, 36 years younger than him and still strikingly beautiful, is somewhere just out of frame, and scattered around the lawn in various states of boredom, mischief, and wariness are most of their 8 children. They are not smiling the way children usually smile for photographs. They are looking at the camera the way children look at anything that has been pointed at them too many times already in their short lives. Familiar, a little suspicious, waiting for it to end so they can go back to whatever they were doing. What that photograph does not show you is that this is only a portion of the Chaplin brood. It does not show you the son in California who was already drinking himself to death at that moment. It does not show you the other son in California, the Broadway star who had quietly decided not to visit because he found the Swiss household stifling. It does not show you the 2 daughters who would one day run away to join the circus, quite literally. It does not show you the infant who never made it out of the hospital in 1919, buried under a little stone that reads "The Little Mouse." It does not show you the son whose father would one day try to sue him in court to stop him from publishing a tell-all memoir. Charlie Chaplin had 11 children across more than 40 years. He had 4 wives, 3 of whom he married while they were teenagers. He was, by every serious biographer's estimate, one of the worst husbands in the history of Hollywood, and by a more complicated measure, one of the most absent fathers in the history of Hollywood, despite living under the same roof as most of his children. The fate of those 11 children, what happened to them, what they became, who they loved, who they lost, how they died, or how they kept going, is a story that almost nobody knows in full. Stay with us, because what comes next is the part the Little Tramp's screen smile never quite told you. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today, who Charlie Chaplin actually was before any of them existed. To understand what it was like to be Charlie Chaplin's child, you have to first understand what it had been like to be Charlie Chaplin's child himself. The pattern repeats so insistently across his 11 children that it becomes impossible to talk about them without first going back to a rented room in South London in the 1890s. He was born in April of 1889, probably on East Street in Walworth, though there is no official record of it, which is strange for a man who would become arguably the most documented human being of his century. His father, Charles Chaplin Sr., was a music hall singer with a beautiful baritone voice and a serious drinking problem. His mother, Hannah, was also a music hall performer, but her voice was already breaking at inconvenient moments on stage, and her mental health was beginning to come apart in a way that nobody in that era had the language for. The parents separated when Charlie was around 1 year old. His father largely disappeared into the bottle. His mother tried to hold the household together on what little she could earn. She failed repeatedly. Charlie and his older half-brother Sidney were sent to the workhouse more than once before Charlie was 9. When Hannah's mental illness became uncontainable, she was committed to Cane Hill Asylum. Charlie was 14 years old when he had to personally take her to the infirmary. He then lived alone for several days, sleeping rough, before his brother came home from the Navy to find him. His father died 2 years before that, aged 38, of cirrhosis of the liver. So by the time Charlie Chaplin was 14, he had an absent, dead, alcoholic father and a mother institutionalized for the rest of her life. He was raised, in effect, by his older brother and by the London streets, and he carried inside him a very specific and lifelong conviction. That conviction was that the world was not a safe place, that he had to make his own money, that he had to make it quickly, and that if the right kind of young and beautiful woman came along, he could perhaps find in her the mother he had never quite been allowed to have. This is the part that matters, because every one of the 11 children we are about to discuss was going to live inside a household shaped by a man who was, in the words of one biographer, a late Victorian in his emotional reserve, pretending for the cameras to be a man of the 20th century. By the time he was 25, Charlie Chaplin was the most famous person on Earth. That is not hyperbole. In the 1910s and 1920s, when film was the first mass medium on the planet, there was simply no one more recognizable than the Little Tramp. And inside that fame, through 4 marriages and countless affairs, Charlie Chaplin went on to do something that seems almost statistically unlikely given his own childhood. He kept having children, 11 of them. From 1919, when a little boy was born in Los Angeles and died 3 days later, to 1962, when a final son was born in a Swiss clinic, to a father who was by then 73 years old. The first of those children is the one whose name almost nobody remembers, Norman Spencer Chaplin, the Little Mouse. The first child Charlie Chaplin ever had was a boy born on the 7th of July, 1919, in a Hollywood hospital to Charlie's first wife, Mildred Harris. Mildred was a film actress herself, who had been performing on screen since the age of 9. She had become Charlie's wife in 1918 when she was 16 years old and Charlie was 29. That was not, even at the time, considered normal. Charlie had believed Mildred was pregnant when they married, and by several accounts from the period, he resented her almost immediately when it turned out she was not. The marriage was effectively over before it had really begun. Charlie was distant and critical. Mildred was too young to understand what she had walked into. By the time she genuinely did become pregnant the following year, the relationship was already in serious decline. The baby was born with a severe congenital deformity. He lived for 3 days. The birth certificate carried the name Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr., which Charlie objected to, and the name was changed afterwards to Norman Spencer Chaplin. Charlie did not visit Mildred in the hospital. He did not attend the funeral either, reportedly because he could not stand Mildred's religious friends who would be there. There was, however, one thing Charlie did do. He arranged for the little boy to be buried in a small plot in Southern California, and he had a stone placed over the grave. The inscription on that stone, carved in careful lettering, reads simply, "The Little Mouse." That is it. No dates, no sermon, no verse, just that small, almost embarrassingly tender nickname, as if Charlie could not bring himself to formalize the loss, but also could not quite let it pass unmarked. It is a detail that people sometimes miss when they talk about Charlie Chaplin's cruelty as a husband and as a father. He could be cruel, and he often was, but there was also, running underneath the cruelty, a kind of sentimental Victorian grief that he did not know how to show in daylight. The stone for Norman was one of those hidden signs, a baby he had not particularly wanted, from a marriage he had come to resent, given a nickname on a grave marker that sounds more like something from a children's storybook than a cemetery. Mildred and Charlie divorced in 1920, the year after Norman died. Mildred was 18 years old. She had buried a child, lost a husband, and would spend the rest of her life trying to rebuild a film career that had stalled because of the marriage. She died of pneumonia in 1944 at the age of 43. But Norman the Little Mouse is where this story begins. Because every one of the 10 children who came after him was going to be born into a household haunted in some way by the knowledge that fatherhood had arrived in Charlie Chaplin's life with a tiny coffin. And the next 2 arrivals would be born in the middle of one of the most explosive scandals in Hollywood history. Charles Chaplin Jr., the son who drank himself out of the world. Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr. was born on the 5th of May, 1925 in Beverly Hills. His mother was Lida Gray, and the way he arrived into the world is one of the more uncomfortable stories in the Chaplin Chronicle. Lida had been born Lilita Louise McMurray in 1908. Charlie had first known her when she was a child. She had been cast in his 1921 film The Kid as a flirting angel. She was 12 years old at the time. By the time Charlie was preparing to cast her in The Gold Rush in 1924, she was 15 and he was 35. They were involved in a relationship that in the state of California was a criminal offense. When Lida became pregnant later that year, her mother and uncle made it very clear to Charlie that unless he married the girl, there would be a prosecution. Charlie married her. He married her in Mexico discreetly in November 1924. He later referred to the marriage in private as a death sentence. This is the household Charles Chaplin Jr. was born into. A teenage mother who had effectively been coerced into the marriage. A father who did not want to be there and made sure everyone around him knew it. A family dynamic that by the time the second son Sidney arrived 10 months later had already begun to crack into pieces. The divorce came in 1927, and it was the Hollywood scandal of the decade. Lita filed a 52-page complaint that made its way into print as an actual book sold on street corners. In it, she detailed Charlie's alleged cruelty, his infidelities, and sexual demands she considered degrading. The judge ordered Charlie to pay an unprecedented settlement of roughly $825,000, something like $15 million in modern money, with $200,000 placed in trust for the two boys. California women's clubs called for his films to be boycotted. There were serious conversations about whether his career was over. It was not over, of course. Charlie recovered, but Charles Jr. and his brother Sidney did not really recover because they were raised in the wreckage. Lita moved on to a long career of drinking and difficult marriages. The boys were bounced between their mother, their maternal grandmother, and boarding schools. They saw their father irregularly, on weekends arranged through lawyers. Charlie tried, in his distracted way, but he was mostly lost as a parent. Charles Jr. served in the U.S. Army in Europe during the Second World War. He came home in 1945 and tried his hand at acting. His father finally did something for him in 1952, casting both sons in the film Limelight. Sidney, the younger brother, was given a substantial supporting role. Charles Jr. got a bit part as a clown, uncredited. It was the beginning of a pattern that would define the rest of his short life. Sidney, handsome and socially flexible, parlayed the role into a Broadway career. Charles Jr., quieter and more fragile, slid into a series of B pictures: The Beat Generation, Fangs of the Wild, High School Confidential. In 1960, he wrote a book called My Father, Charlie Chaplin. It is, if you can find a copy, one of the gentlest books ever written by the child of a famous parent. Charles Jr. does not lash out. He does not score points. He describes his father as a man who was well-meaning and often distracted, a man who loved his sons in his way but did not really know how to be present for them. It is not an angry book. It is a sad book by a man trying to talk himself into the idea that the father he had was the father he needed. By the time he wrote it, Charles Jr. was already drinking heavily. He had been married twice and divorced twice. His career continued its gentle slide. He moved back in with his mother Lita in Los Angeles for long stretches. He was, by most accounts, a kind man, a funny man in small rooms, a man whose own decency made his struggles harder to watch. In March of 1968, he fell in his home and broke his leg. He was treated, came home, went back to the hospital shortly afterwards with pneumonia, came home again. On the 20th of March 1968, his grandmother Lillian Gray found him unconscious. He was dead by the time the ambulance arrived. The official cause was a massive pulmonary embolism caused by an extensive thrombosis in his right leg, almost certainly triggered by the broken bone and the long period of drinking that had preceded it. He was 42 years old. His father did not attend the funeral. Charlie Chaplin was by then living in permanent exile in Switzerland, and the United States government had effectively revoked his permission to come home. But even if he had been allowed to travel, by every account from those around him, Charlie received the news of his eldest surviving son's death with a kind of emotional flatness that his other children found difficult to witness. He had buried his first son, Norman, in 1919. He was now burying his second, Charles Jr., in 1968, and he had another 9 children still alive, scattered across 2 continents, each one waiting to see if their father was going to come to them. Sidney Chaplin, the brother who actually made it to Broadway. Sidney Earl Chaplin was born on the 30th of March 1926, 10 months after his older brother, 5 weeks premature. He was named after Charlie's beloved older half-brother Sidney, who had helped launch Charlie's career in London. Lita Gray, his mother, disliked that older Sidney intensely and insisted on calling her son Tommy for most of his childhood, which gives you a small indication of the temperature of that household. Like his brother, Sidney was raised mostly by his mother and grandmother, attended military school and boarding school, and served in the U.S. Army in Europe during the war. He came home with what several sources describe as a newfound work ethic. He joined a small experimental theater group called the Circle Theater in Los Angeles in 1946. His father, who had been politely dismissive of both sons' acting ambitions, actually became interested in what the Circle was doing and directed several plays there, including some in which Sidney had starring roles. It was the closest Sidney ever came to a working relationship with his father. Then he went to Broadway, and everything changed. In 1956, he was cast opposite Judy Holliday in a new musical called Bells Are Ringing, with songs by Betty Comden, Adolph Green, and Jewel Stein. Sidney played a depressed playwright named Jeff Moss, a part that required him to sing the songs Just in Time and Long Before I Knew You. The show opened in November 1956 and ran for 924 performances. Sidney won the 1957 Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical. He was 31 years old. His father could not see any of it. Charlie Chaplin had been effectively exiled from the United States in 1952 after his re-entry permit was revoked mid-ocean while he was sailing to London for the premiere of Limelight. He would not be allowed to set foot in America again until 1972, when he was given a special Oscar. So during the entire period of Sidney's Broadway peak, through Bells Are Ringing, through his Tony-nominated turn as Nick Arnstein opposite Barbra Streisand in the original 1964 production of Funny Girl, Charlie Chaplin was sitting in a house in Switzerland reading reviews in the mail. Sidney was, by every contemporary account, the handsomer, more socially relaxed of the two brothers. He had a famously public romance with Joan Collins during the making of Land of the Pharaohs. He was romantically linked with Judy Holliday during their Broadway run. He had a warm, grainy baritone that you can still hear on the original cast recordings, where his slightly melancholy delivery gives a song like Long Before I Knew You a particular kind of ache. He was asked once, in 1967, what it was like to be the son of Charlie Chaplin. His answer was one of the cleaner pieces of advice anyone in that family ever gave. He said that he thought anyone whose life had been scarred because of the fame of his father was, in his view, a bore. He meant that he had decided, consciously, not to build a life around his father's shadow, and for the most part, he did not. He married the French dancer Noël Adam in 1960, and they had a son named Stéphane. The marriage lasted until 1985. He retired from acting around 1980 when he was in his mid-50s and opened a celebrity bistro in Palm Springs called Chaplin's, which ran for about a decade. He played a lot of golf. He entered a long relationship with a woman named Margaret Beebe, whom he married in 1998 after a 14-year engagement that reads more like comedy than commitment. Sidney Earl Chaplin died on the 3rd of March 2009 at his home in Rancho Mirage, California, of complications from a stroke. He was 82 years old. He had outlived both of his parents, his only full brother, and most of the Broadway crowd he had come up with. His Tony Award, the one he won in 1957 while his father was 4,000 miles away and forbidden from the country, is somewhere in the possession of his son Stéphane, the fourth wife, the exile, and the 8 who would come next. Before we can get to the 8 remaining children, we have to pause for a moment on the woman who actually bore all of them, because the 8 Chaplins who came into the world after Sidney did not arrive into the same family that the first 3 had been born into. They arrived into something that looked on the outside like a fortress of calm and stability, and on the inside like a particular kind of gilded isolation. Una O'Neill was born in Bermuda in May of 1925, the same month that Charles Jr. was being born in Beverly Hills. She was the daughter of the playwright Eugene O'Neill, Pulitzer winner, Nobel laureate, and one of the most reliably absent fathers in American literary history. Eugene had walked out of Una's mother's life when Una was 2. He had kept walking. By the time she was 17, Una was a New York debutante, photographed at the Stork Club, named Debutante No. 1 of the 1942 season. She was friends with Gloria Vanderbilt and Truman Capote. She had dated J.D. Salinger, and she wanted to be an actress. She moved to Los Angeles in 1943 to audition. She met Charlie Chaplin at one of those auditions. He was 54. She was 17, a few weeks from turning 18. They married on the 16th of June 1943, 10 days after her 18th birthday, in a small private ceremony in Carpinteria, California. Eugene O'Neill was so furious at the union, at the fact that his estranged daughter had married a man his own age, that he cut her out of his life entirely and refused all her subsequent attempts at reconciliation until his death in 1953. She never saw him again. What she got in exchange, and this is the part that matters, was a marriage that worked. That is the thing that almost no biographer disputes. Whatever you think of Charlie Chaplin as a husband to teenage girls, whatever the pattern, the marriage to Ona was the one that held. They stayed together for 34 years, until Charlie's death. They had 8 children. Ona gave up her own acting ambitions before they had even begun, and she organized her entire adult life around Charlie. He became, in her own later words, her world. She said she had never seen or lived anything else. The 8 children born of that marriage would grow up inside the most carefully constructed household Charlie had ever been part of. From 1943 until 1952, they lived in Beverly Hills. Then, in September of 1952, while the family was sailing to London for the premiere of Limelight, Charlie received a telegram informing him that his American re-entry visa had been revoked. He was accused of communist sympathies. The family bought a large estate in Switzerland called Manoir de Bonn above Lake Geneva, and that is where they raised the children. It is important to understand what that estate was. A 35-acre property, a staff of 12. The children were driven to school in Rolls-Royces. They learned French. They had everything material that any child could want, and they had a father who was by the 1950s already in his late 60s and operating at a kind of emotional remove that was almost impossible for a child to penetrate. He worked in the mornings. He sat with Una in the evenings. He did not, for the most part, know how to be in the same room with a small child without feeling somewhat awkward about it. He had staff for that. His daughter Jane, born in 1957, would later say that she grew up in the house with her father for 17 years before she had her first real private conversation with him. 17 years, in the same house. We will come back to Jane. But first, the eldest of the 8. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Geraldine Chaplin, the one who became famous on her own. Geraldine Lee Chaplin was born on the 31st of July, 1944, in Santa Monica. Charlie was 55 years old. Una was 19. Geraldine was the first child of the marriage, and she was, almost from the beginning, marked as the one who had inherited something particular. She had her mother's quiet intensity and her father's face. She was 8 years old when the family left America for good. She grew up in Switzerland, attended boarding schools, became fluent in French and Spanish. At 17, she decided she did not want to go to university and she wanted to be a ballet dancer. She studied at the Royal Ballet School in London in 1961, then danced professionally in Paris for a year. She later said, with clear-eyed honesty, that she had not started young enough and that she would never be good enough at ballet to matter, so she stopped. She was working as a model in Paris in 1964 when David Lean saw her and cast her as Tanya in Dr. Zhivago. It was her first real role. Dr. Zhivago became one of the biggest films of the decade. Geraldine was 20 years old and suddenly a Golden Globe nominee, a recognized face, a person in her own right. What happened next is the part that distinguishes Geraldine from almost every other child in the Chaplin family. She did not coast on the name. She worked. She worked in English, in Spanish, in French, in Italian, and in German. She became a regular collaborator with Robert Altman, appearing in Nashville in 1975, for which she received her second Golden Globe nomination. She worked with the Spanish director Carlos Saura for most of the 1970s, both professionally and as his partner. She had a son with him, Shane Saura Chaplin, born in 1974. Shane grew up in Spain, became a psychologist, and was notably the first grandchild of Charlie Chaplin to obtain a university degree. Geraldine eventually entered a long relationship with the Chilean cinematographer Patricio Castilla. They had a daughter, Ona Castilla Chaplin, born in 1986 and named after her grandmother. That younger Ona has become a working actress in her own right. She played Talisa Maeger on Game of Thrones, appeared in the BBC drama Taboo, and was cast in James Cameron's Avatar sequels. So the Chaplin name, by way of Geraldine, is still turning up in the closing credits of billion-dollar films 100 years after Charlie walked into his first American studio. In 1992, when Richard Attenborough made his biographical film Chaplin, starring Robert Downey Jr., Geraldine was cast as her own grandmother, Hannah Chaplin. The Hannah whose breakdown in a London infirmary had shaped her son into the man who had shaped her father, into the man who had shaped her. It is the kind of casting decision that sounds like a gimmick and actually turns out to be one of the quietly moving performances in a film full of them. She received a Golden Globe nomination for it. Her third. She is in her 80s now, still working. She has given a lot of interviews over the years about her father. Her position, more or less, is that he was a difficult and often cold man who was also a genius and her father, and that all three of those things are going to have to be allowed to coexist in the record. She is the one the rest of the siblings sometimes deferred to, particularly after their mother's death. And she is, when you look at the 8 children of Una and Charlie as a group, perhaps the most straightforwardly successful story among them. Which is a strange thing to say about a woman whose famous father spent most of her childhood in the same house without quite managing to talk to her. Michael Chaplin, the son who wrote the book his father tried to block. Michael John Chaplin was born on the 7th of March 1946 in Santa Monica. Geraldine was 2 years old. He was the first son of the Una marriage, and from a very early age he was the one who did not fit. Where Geraldine was dutiful, Michael was restless. Where Geraldine would later describe her father with measured affection, Michael would, at the age of 19, sign a book contract with a British publisher to write the most rebellious, druggy, sex-filled hippie memoir that anyone had ever written about growing up in a famous household. The background is this. He had been cast as a small boy in his father's 1952 film Limelight. In 1957, he played the boy Rupert Maccabee in his father's film A King in New York. It was, by all accounts, a genuinely good performance. He was 11 years old. He did not want to be an actor. He wanted, essentially, to be a hippie. At 16, he ran away from Switzerland to London. He arrived in swinging London in the mid-1960s, the exact right age to fall into the exact right culture. He grew his hair out. He started smoking marijuana. He experimented with LSD. He lived in flats with other runaways and aspiring musicians. He briefly pursued a pop singing career, releasing a single called I Am What I Am on London Records. The single did not sell particularly well. What did sell was the book. In 1966, at the age of 20, he signed a contract with the British publisher Leslie Fruin to publish his memoir. The title was I Couldn't Smoke the Grass on My Father's Lawn. It detailed his childhood at Manoir de Ban, his frustrations with his father's late Victorian strictness, his running away to London, his drug use, his girls, his scrapes with British authority. Charlie Chaplin, then 77 years old, went into the kind of rage that his older children remembered from their childhoods. He filed an injunction in the British courts to prevent the book's publication, arguing that it would cause detrimental harm to him and his family. The Court of Appeal set the injunction aside. The judges held that Michael's contract was binding and that a father could not prevent an adult son from publishing a memoir simply because it was embarrassing. The book came out in 1966. The American edition, published by G.P. Putnam, was subtitled Pot, Girls and Swingers in London's Ultramod set. That is what it was. A teenage hippie memoir written by a 20-year-old whose father was the most recognizable comedian of the 20th century. The book did not destroy Michael's life. He pulled himself back together. He married a writer named Patrice Johns, with whom he had 2 sons. That marriage ended. He later married a painter named Patricia Batoudier, with whom he has 5 more children, giving him a total of 7. His daughter Dolores Chaplin, born in 1971, has appeared in French films with directors including Olivier Assayas and Xavier Beauvois, the latter of whom made a film in 2014 about the theft of Charlie Chaplin's coffin, an event we will get to in a moment. His daughter Carmen Chaplin, born in 1977, has become an actress and filmmaker in her own right. In 2024, she released a documentary called Chaplin, Spirit of the Tramp, about her grandfather's Romani heritage. Michael himself, who eventually moved to southwest France where he now farms, published a novel in 2023 called A Fallen God. He is in some way the child of Charlie Chaplin, who came closest to open rebellion and then quietly reconciled with the legacy on his own terms. He is still alive, in his late 70s, living in the French countryside, having spent most of the last 30 years being, by all accounts, a working father to his 7 children in a way that his own father had never quite managed for the 11 of them. Josephine, Victoria, Eugene, the middle children who went their own ways. Between Michael and the 3 youngest children who would round out the household at memoir.This, there were 3 more Chaplin children who occupied the difficult middle ground of a large family. They were the ones who had the most siblings above and below them, and each of them, in their own way, built lives that were deliberately unlike anything the Chaplin name had ever been associated with. Josephine Hannah Chaplin was born on the 28th of March 1949. She appeared as a child in the opening scene of her father's Limelight in 1952 alongside Geraldine and Michael. She grew up bilingual and found her way into film acting as an adult, although she did it largely in Europe. In 1972, she played May, the adulterous wife of the elderly Sir January, in Pier Paolo Pasolini's adaptation of the Canterbury Tales. That role is the one most people remember her for. She had a series of European roles through the 1970s and 1980s, including a part opposite Klaus Kinski in a German-language version of Jack the Ripper in 1976. Josephine's personal life was unusually complicated even by the standards of this family. She married a Greek businessman named Nicholas Sistovaris in 1969, and they had a son, Charlie, born in 1971. That marriage ended in 1977. She then lived for a decade with the French actor Maurice René, with whom she had another son, Julien, in 1980. René died in 1983. Josephine then married the French archaeologist Jean-Claude Gardin in 1989 and had a third son, Arthur, with him. They remained married until Gardin's death in 2013. For years, Josephine managed the Chaplin office in Paris on behalf of all her siblings, overseeing licensing and archives. She sponsored the statue of the Little Tramp that stands in Waterville, Ireland, where Charlie used to holiday. She lived quietly in Paris for most of her later years. She died on the 13th of July 2023 at the age of 74. Victoria Agnes Chaplin is the next one, born on the 19th of May 1951. Victoria is the one who ran away to the circus, and the phrase is literal. As a teenager, she had appeared briefly in her father's final film, A Countess from Hong Kong, in 1966. Charlie had actually intended her to be his last great muse. He had written a screenplay called The Freak, in which Victoria was to star as a winged girl discovered in the Amazonian rainforest. He was preparing to direct it. It was never filmed. Charlie's health was declining, and in 1969, an 18-year-old Victoria read a magazine article in which she was interviewed about her aspirations, and she mentioned almost offhandedly that what she really wanted to do with her life was become a circus clown. A French actor and mime named Jean-Baptiste Thierry, 14 years her senior, read the article. He wrote to her. He suggested that they start a new kind of circus together. She agreed. They eloped. Charlie did not approve. Charlie did not approve in the grand Victorian manner he had always approved or disapproved. It did not matter. Victoria and Jean-Baptiste married in January of 1970. That same year, they appeared briefly as 2 clowns in Federico Fellini's film The Clowns. In 1974, they founded a small, intimate troupe called Le Cirque Imaginaire, and from 1990 onwards, they have performed under the name Le Cirque Invisible, which they continue to perform to this day. Their shows involve no animals, no ringmaster. They involve Victoria and Jean-Baptiste on a small stage, alongside elaborate handmade costumes Victoria designs herself. They had 2 children, Aurelia Thierry, born in 1971, and James Thierry, born in 1974. Both have become internationally recognized performers in their own right, with James in particular developing a reputation as one of the most extraordinary physical theater artists working today. He has become, in effect, the grandson through whom Charlie Chaplin's physical comedy actually continues in a living performance tradition. Which is fitting because of all his 11 children, Victoria is the one Charlie himself had singled out as the one who might carry his comedic gift forward. He was right about that part, he had just been wrong about the form it would take. Victoria has asked over the decades that very little be publicly written about her. The official Chaplin website respects her wish. She has given almost no interviews. Eugene Anthony Chaplin was born on the 23rd of August 1953, the first of the children to be born at Manoir de Bonn in Switzerland. He studied stage management at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. He worked at the Geneva Opera House as a stage manager, then transitioned into sound engineering. In that second career, he worked as a recording engineer for, among others, the Rolling Stones, David Bowie, and Queen. He directed a documentary film called Charlie Chaplin, A Family Tribute, and he created a stage musical called Smile, which tells his father's life through his father's music, much of which Charlie had composed himself, including the title song. Eugene has 7 children of his own, 5 from his first marriage to Bernadette Macready and twin daughters from his second marriage. He lives in Switzerland. He is, of all the 8 Una children, the one who most resembles his father physically, a fact his older siblings have occasionally commented on. The 3 youngest, and a very private conversation in a library. The last 3 children of the Una marriage were born when Charlie was already an old man by any measure. Jane in 1957 when Charlie was 68, Annette in 1959 when he was 70, Christopher in 1962 when he was 73. By the time Christopher was old enough to form memories, his father was an elderly gentleman who moved slowly and worked in the morning, and sat in the library with the sound off during football games. Jane Cecil Chaplin was born on the 23rd of May 1957. She has spoken more openly than any of her siblings about what it was actually like inside the house, and her account is the most quietly devastating. She grew up, by her own description, fearing rather than knowing her father. She was constantly told by her mother, by the staff, by her older siblings, that he was a genius, that she would never match him, that she should not disturb him, that he was working, that he was busy, that she should not tell him about that. She describes growing up in a household where her father was simultaneously the center of gravity and the least accessible person in the house. She was a self-doubting adolescent who did poorly at school. When she was 17 years old in 1974, her mother happened to leave the house briefly on some errand. Jane wandered into the library. Her father was sitting there watching a football game on the television with the sound turned down. She was about to leave, as she usually would have. He reached over and touched her hand. He asked her if she wanted to keep watching. She said no. And then for the next 17 minutes, Charlie Chaplin spoke to his 17-year-old daughter about her life. Una had told him that Jane was nervous about an audition for acting school. He wanted to know why. He told her gently that he had also had a lot of doubts in his own life, that it had not been easy, that he had spent a great deal of time frightened of failing. It was the first and, as far as Jane has ever said publicly, the only sustained private conversation she had with her father. A few years later, in December of 1977, he died. Jane later moved to New York. She worked briefly for Milos Forman. She moved to Orlando, Florida, where she lived for a period with the film producer Ilya Salkind of Superman fame. They had 2 sons, Orson and Osceola. She moved to Cartagena, Colombia, in 2002, where she has lived ever since. In 2006, she published her book, 17 Minutes with My Father, in French. The book describes the coldness of the Chaplin household, the sense of isolation among the 8 siblings, the way her mother Una acted as the sole emotional connection between Charlie and his own children. Jane has said, in the years since, that writing the book was the thing that allowed her to finally understand that her father had been a nice man, not a son of a bitch, which is what she had been raised by her mother to believe. It is a strange thing to say about a parent. It is also, in the specific context of that household, an act of real reconciliation. Annette Emily Chaplin, called Annie in the family, was born on the 3rd of December 1959. She is the quietest of the 8 children in the public record. She married a French theater director named Jacques Ossenel, and the 2 of them have spent the last 30 years building a life that is almost the exact opposite of everything her parents lived through. They live between Paris, Switzerland, and a small town in France called Montoire-sur-Loire, where they converted an old grain silo into a theater and mount modern comedies in which Annie performs. She also raises Arabian thoroughbreds and Franche-Montane horses with her husband. She has given almost no interviews. She has chosen, very deliberately, a life of small-scale theater and horse breeding in rural France. It is the most genuinely private life any of the 11 Chaplin children has built. Christopher James Chaplin, the youngest, was born on the 8th of July 1962. His father was 73. His father would be dead before Christopher's 16th birthday. The Charlie Chaplin Christopher knew was the Charlie Chaplin of the 1970s, the one who had been brought back to America in 1972 for a standing ovation at the Oscars, the one who had been knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1975, the one whose health was beginning to fail. He studied piano, then moved to London to become an actor. He had supporting roles in a handful of European and American productions through the late 1980s and 1990s, including Agnieszka Holland's film Total Eclipse, in which he played the French poet Charles Cros opposite Leonardo DiCaprio's Rimbaud and David Thewlis's Verlaine. Since 2005, Christopher has turned almost entirely to music. He composes experimental electronic and ambient music and has released more than a dozen albums on the Austrian independent label Fabrik Records. His work is almost entirely unlike anything anyone would associate with the Chaplin name, which is presumably the point. The Coffin in the Cornfield, and looking back at 11, there is one event in the collective life of Charlie Chaplin's children that deserves its own telling, because it is the moment when all 8 of the Una children found themselves unexpectedly reunited in the news. Charlie Chaplin died in his sleep at Manoir-de-Bonn on the morning of the 25th of December 1977, Christmas Day. He was 88 years old. He had suffered a stroke. He was buried 4 days later in a simple ceremony at the Coursier-sur-Vevey Cemetery, just up the hill from the manoir. On the night of the 1st of March 1978, just over 2 months after the funeral, 2 unemployed car mechanics broke into the cemetery. They were both political refugees. One was a 24-year-old Polish man named Roman Wardis. The other was a 38-year-old Bulgarian man named Gancho Ganev. They had shovels and torches. They dug up Charlie Chaplin's oak coffin, which weighed approximately 135 kilograms, and they carried it across the graveyard to a waiting estate car. They drove it to a cornfield about a mile from the Chaplin family home. They reburied the coffin in a shallow hole, and then they went back to their rented rooms and waited. A few days later, Una Chaplin received a telephone call. The caller demanded 600,000 Swiss francs for the safe return of her husband's body. Una refused to pay. She famously told the press that her husband would have found the whole demand ridiculous. Her exact recorded response was that her husband was in heaven and in her heart. The Swiss police tapped the family's telephone. The kidnappers at one point escalated by threatening the lives of Una's 2 youngest children, Annette and Christopher, who were then 18 and 15 years old. This is the part where Geraldine Chaplin, who was by then a 33-year-old international film star, stepped forward and took over the negotiations. She spoke to the kidnappers on the phone, pretending to negotiate, while the police traced the calls. She did this for weeks. It was, by a considerable margin, the most difficult performance of her career, and the one she has spoken about least in interviews. On the 16th of May 1978, 76 days after the coffin was stolen, the police arrested Wardis and Ganev. The 2 men led the authorities to the cornfield. Charlie Chaplin's coffin was retrieved, unopened, intact, and reburied in a concrete grave, with a concrete slab laid over it to prevent any future interference. There is something about the image of Geraldine on the telephone, playing for time while her grandfather's body lay in a Swiss cornfield and her teenage siblings were under police protection, that captures something about what it had always been to be a Chaplin child, which is that your father's fame, even his corpse's fame, was never entirely under your control. Una lived for another 13 years after Charlie's death. By the late 1980s, she had settled back permanently at Manoir-de-Bonn, where she had begun drinking heavily. She died of pancreatic cancer on the 27th of September 1991 at the age of 66. She was buried next to Charlie in the Coursier Cemetery. In her will, she instructed that all of her personal diaries and letters, of which there were many, be destroyed. Most of them were. What did not survive is perhaps the single greatest piece of missing biographical material in 20th century Hollywood history. She simply did not want to be known that way. Let us take stock now. Norman died in 1919, 3 days old. Charles Jr. died in 1968, aged 42. Josephine died in 2023, aged 74. The other 8 are all, as of today, still alive. Sydney made it to 82. The remaining 7, Michael, Geraldine, Victoria, Eugene, Jane, Annette, and Christopher, are scattered across France, Spain, Switzerland, Colombia, and the United States. They are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They have had, among them, dozens of children of their own. They have written memoirs, performed in circuses, composed avant-garde music, trained Arabian horses, engineered records for Queen, acted in Dr. Zhivago and Game of Thrones, farmed in France, lived quietly in Colombia, and run the Paris office that still manages the Little Tramp's image 100 years after he first waddled across a silent cinema screen. When you lay all 11 of them out, certain patterns emerge that are hard to ignore. The first is how uneven Charlie's attention was across the 3 families he fathered children with. Mildred got his indifference. Lita got his resentment and then his absence. Only Una got the 34-year marriage and the household of 12 staff. The 2 children of the Lita marriage, Charles Jr. and Sydney, were effectively raised as Hollywood's forgotten stepchildren. One of them drank himself to death at 42. The other one won a Tony Award without his father ever seeing him perform. The second pattern is how hard most of them worked to define themselves against the name. Geraldine worked internationally in 4 languages. Michael ran away to London to become a pop singer and a hippie. Victoria literally joined a circus. Eugene went into recording studios and worked behind the glass. Jane moved to Colombia. Annette converted a silo into a theater. Christopher went into experimental electronic music. Almost none of them, with the notable exception of Geraldine, built a career that would be instantly recognizable to a general audience as famous. They had all seen what famous looked like up close, and most of them had decided they did not want it. The third pattern is how much of the emotional labor of the family was carried by Una. Charlie was the center of gravity. Charlie was the genius. Charlie was the one to be managed around. Una was the one who actually spoke to the children, the one who knew their daily lives, the one who translated between the father and his own offspring. When she died in 1991, the siblings effectively lost the person who had been connecting them to the memory of their father. And there is a fourth pattern, which is grief. Norman's mother, Mildred, grieved him for the rest of her short life. Lita Gray watched both her sons struggle, attended the funeral of one of them, and spent decades writing and rewriting her own version of her time with Charlie. Una drank after her husband's death and died lonely in the Swiss house they had built together. Charlie himself, by the end, had outlived 2 of his own children. He had buried an infant in 1919 and an adult son in 1968. He had presided over decades of family drama from a library in Switzerland. And he had, by every account of those who were there, become increasingly silent in his final years. A small man in a cardigan in a house full of people he loved and did not quite know how to speak to. There is a photograph, taken in the garden of Manoir de Bonn sometime in the 1960s, of Charlie Chaplin sitting in a wicker chair in the sun with most of his Una children around him. It does not look the same to me now as it did at the beginning of this video. You can see now what each of those faces contained. You know that the small girl standing near his knee will grow up and take a telephone call from the men who have stolen her father's coffin and will keep them talking long enough for the Swiss police to catch them. You know that the older boy behind her will write a drug-soaked memoir his father will try to have suppressed in court, and will then spend 50 years making peace with the Chaplin name on a farm in France. You know that the little one somewhere in the background will grow up into an experimental musician in his 60s, still releasing albums. You know that the one you cannot see in the photograph at all because she is not born yet, will one day write a book called 17 Minutes with My Father about the only real conversation she ever had with him. And you know that 2 more of his children, the ones from the Lita Gray marriage, are at that moment already thousands of miles away in Los Angeles, already estranged, already on the slow and separate trajectories that will end one of them in a Hollywood mausoleum at 42, and the other in a Palm Springs bistro, winning trophies on the desert golf course. 11 children, 4 mothers, 3 of whom met him when they were teenagers. An infant son buried under a stone that reads "The Little Mouse." 2 Hollywood sons, one who drank himself to death, and one who won a Tony Award. 8 Swiss-raised children of a marriage that held for 34 years, who scattered themselves deliberately across Europe and South America, and built lives that have almost nothing in common with one another, except the name on their passport and the face they can sometimes see in the mirror. Charlie Chaplin was by many measures a terrible husband and a difficult father. He was also by any measure a genius. Both of those things are true. His children had to live inside both of those truths for as long as they lived with him, and most of them have had to keep living inside them long after he was gone. They are the people those truths produced. They are what happened next. And their stories, the ones told quietly in French memoirs and on small circus stages and in Swiss recording studios and in Colombian cafés and on grave markers in California, are the part of the Charlie Chaplin story that almost nobody ever quite puts together in full, until now. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.